In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise be to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the most gracious, the most merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. Only to you we worship and only to you we turn for help. Guide us on the straight path, the path of those who have gained your favor, not the path of those who have gained your anger and gone astray. Welcome everyone to the Green Ramadan webinar hosted by the Bahu Trust. It's a pleasure to welcome you all today, and an even bigger pleasure to welcome our panelists, Sarah Joseph from ML Media, Alessandra Palange from XR Muslims, and Hafiz Dr. Ather Hussain, an Imam and researcher from Leicester. Why we're doing this Green Ramadan webinar, I'll just give you a little bit of history. With the support for Faith for the Climate, an interfaith environmental organization, and Religions for Peace, the Bahu Trust developed quite a comprehensive toolkit on how to achieve a greener and environmentally friendly Ramadan. Now, unfortunately, we've decided not to launch it this year. And a lot of it was because the toolkit was aimed at tackling materialism and consumerism. And because of the coronavirus lockdown, people are not in jobs anymore, they're not spending as much. And so we didn't think it'd be appropriate to start talking about those issues. However, it did get us thinking about what this lockdown should look like, or what it should mean to us, and what will Ramadan look like, and what lessons do we take from everything that's happening. And whilst on one hand, we're all very restricted with what we can do, on the other hand, we're seeing that nature is starting to reclaim its ground, and nature which provides for us. We're now seeing less CO2, cleaner air, more wildlife. So there's lots to take from this. So the aim of today is to hold some reflective talks and to hear from everyone, and for us to get thinking about what it means to us. So all speakers will speak between 12 and 15 minutes. So at the end of all speakers, it'll be open for question and answers. And there's a little icon towards the bottom of your screen, which says Q&A, I believe. Just submit your questions. And at the end, we'll try to get through as many of them. And I do apologize, this is the first time I'm using this webinar facility. So if I make any technical mistakes, please forgive me. And there was supposed to be a share screen on this, but I can't see the facility. So any of the panelists, if you've got a presentation, I'm sorry, you won't be able to, you'll just have to talk, including myself. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the first topic. And the first topic is about the Profits of Ramadan. How did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spend his Ramadan, and what do we take from that? And I only have 10 minutes or so for this topic, and it's a very colossal topic, and there's no way that I can do justice in talking about how the Prophet, peace be upon him, did his Ramadan. In fact, I've only been learning about it recently, and the more I'm learning, the more I've realized that I'm only scratching the surface. And I'm only specifically picking on points where we can learn lessons regarding environmental concerns, or it's in relation to lockdown that we're currently facing. And at the end, I can give you some reading that you guys can do yourselves. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spent this month in full service and dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he spent day and night in dhikr and making dua for our ummah. That's how much Ramadan meant to him. And it's important to note that the Prophet's relationship with Ramadan didn't just begin with the obligation to fast. He had a connection with this month way before that. And it was during this month that he would achieve seclusion in Mount Hira on the outskirts of Makkah and connect with Allah. And this would become his source of tranquility and focus and seclusion. And furthermore, it was during the month of Ramadan, when he was in the cave Hira, that the angel Jibreel alayhi salam brought Allah's eternal message. Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who created. The Quran was revealed, in the month of Ramadan. And so why am I mentioning this in particular? We are used to a very different type of Ramadan, a more communal Ramadan. And we can't comprehend this month without the mosque, or without getting together with other people, or without being invited to break fast with others. And I'm hearing many of my friends and colleagues and family members who are saying, oh, this is going to be a very different Ramadan. This is going to be a very difficult Ramadan. And that may well be true, because that's what we're used to. But I just want to remind everyone that it was during the Prophet, peace be upon him, self-isolation, that he received the greatest gift. And the greatest gift that we all received was the Holy Quran, subhanAllah. And let's also not forget that he was surrounded by nature, the sublime hills of Makkah, and in the Mount Nur itself. So, you can see where I'm getting here with the whole isolation, nature, all these things, they're all connected. And we have some opportunity now to put ourselves in that same type of scenario. So I think it's safe to infer from this that there is a huge deepness and importance of the relationship between the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Ramadan, isolation, and environment. So I want to go on to some of the more practical tips around what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did during Ramadan himself. So we'll start off with suhoor. And suhoor is the pre-dawn meal we have before we begin our fast, just before Fajr time. And the Prophet ﷺ described suhoor as a holy blessed meal. And what meal could be more blessed than the one which helps and aids obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And Imam Tabrani narrates the following dua of the Prophet from Sayyidina Abu Sa'id. O Allah, send blessings on those who perform suhoor. So we know that the pre-dawn meal is very important and encouraged. But what did the Prophet ﷺ himself have for his meal? And in most hadith narrations that I've come across, I've seen that the Prophet ﷺ mainly ate dates and water, and quite often only 2 dates. Now compare this with how we do our suhoor. We stuff ourselves, we eat as much as possible, we stuff our bellies, thinking we need to, we're like bears before they go into hibernation, and we start overeating, and that wasn't within the Sunnah. And I know I'm generalizing, but you get what I'm saying. So within the Sunnah, eat very less. So now moving on to during the day. The Prophet, peace upon him, had many activities during the day in Ramadan that kept him occupied, and the main activity being reading the Quran. Now the Prophet ﷺ's deep relationship with the Quran and the month of Ramadan is not hidden from anybody. The revelation upon the sacred heart of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began in this month, and no one is more aware of that link more than the Prophet himself. And even though reciting the Quran was his norm throughout the year, he would increase this during this month. So my message to all you is use this month to recite more Quran. And the Prophet, peace upon him, would love to listen to others too. He would recite the Quran. And there's a hadith which I came across in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, that the Prophet, peace upon him, would ask companions like Abdullah bin Masud to recite with him. And also in the month of Ramadan, he would revise the Quran with the angel Jibreel. So again, my message to you is, don't just recite yourself, busy yourself with reciting the Quran with your children, with your family. And I was discussing this with Sarah, actually. I can't remember whether there's a WhatsApp conversation or on the phone, but we were talking about the bird songs. And while we have beautiful summer weather, go sit in your garden and recite Quran around the blessings and ni'mah that Allah has surrounded you with. And if you don't have a garden, open your window and take the breeze in and listen to the bird song. So there's various different things you can do. Also, generosity is a big factor about Ramadan. And I don't have to remind people about the importance of charity in this month. Again, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ set the standard for us. The Prophet's generosity did not just begin after the announcement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but dates back to when he began dealing with people. So his wife, Sayyidina Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, praises him and says, by Allah, he will never let you be worried. He looks after the guests, reduces others' burdens, helps the helpless, and gives support in the trials faced in the path of truth. This is in Sahih Bukhari. And there are numerous wisdoms behind the increasing generosity in the month of Ramadan. And everyone is fully aware, but I cannot stress enough how much that means or would mean to people, especially in these current times. So increase your generosity, spend your time helping other people. Another act during Ramadan was the act of miswak. So every person of understanding knows how much the Prophet ﷺ loved the miswak. He even used it whilst fasting. Again, there are countless hadiths on this matter. So it's so much more environmentally friendlier than plastic toothbrush and chemical-based toothpaste. And again, I could talk forever about miswak. And I want to also talk about focusing on your spirituality. And there's a hadith that I came across, which I think is very, very key. And it's Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said fasting is not just refraining from food and drink, but also refraining from useless and decent talk. And again, why am I mentioning this? Because in my opinion, this is probably one of the most important lessons we take, especially during the coronavirus crisis. And currently, people are full of thoughts and opinions about what's happening, what's going on. People are full of anxiety. And even more dangerous is the rise of fake news. And I suppose this hadith is just telling us to switch off from everything, focus on Allah during Ramadan. Remember, Allah knows best, and He is the best of planners. Okay, so focus on your spirituality, not on anything else. So I want to move on to iftar, how the Prophet peace be upon him did his iftar. Now, the items of that the Prophet peace be upon him preferred for iftar were dates and water. And in a hadith by Anas bin Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, the Prophet performed iftar with fresh dates. If there weren't any fresh dates, then with dry dates. And if there weren't any dry dates, then with water. And on many occasions, it would be just dates and water. And some occasions, it would also be with milk. And also, Sayyidina Anas, may Allah be pleased with him, also narrates that the Prophet, peace be upon him, favored food not touched by fire. So he would prefer iftar with 3 dates or anything not touched by fire. And again, I think scholars have said that the wisdom in this being that desire to attain similarity with the food of paradise. And I would also take some lesson, if I reflect on this, is the amount of energy we use in cooking food and what we can take. You can make your own judgments on that. And furthermore, our Prophet, peace be upon him, he loved communal iftars, and especially opening his fast with the poor. And I understand right now communal iftars are not possible. But it was one of the blessings of the Prophet's teaching that his companions did not perform iftar alone, but involved the poor and destitute. And there was so much that he would do. So again, while you're giving charity, look out for other people around you who are living alone, who are vulnerable, who are in isolation. If you have food, provide food for those people. If you have iftar, some people are embarrassed to ask. So just like the whole public nation is doing this in Ramadan, we need to look at ways of how we can support, link in with food banks, link in with your local masjids, think about other people who may need food. And I suppose one of my biggest concerns about iftar, and I think that concern still might relate to now, is the way we do iftars in Ramadan. Our iftars become a huge lavish meals. And whilst Ramadan is all about refraining, giving our body a break, giving the earth a break, we end up cooking and eating a lot more. So please do start reflecting on some of these things. And coming towards the end of my talk, you know, there's so much more that I can talk about, and you know, the Prophet, how the Prophet spent Tarawih prayers, Itikaf, Laylatul Qadr, Eid, but I can't. I would recommend this book, which is called The Profits of Ramadhan. And what I will do is during the next talk, I will put a link on where you can buy this book. But this is quite detailed and very easy reading on what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did. And I want to end with a message, something. I wanted to show you a slide, actually, a picture. And I came across a tweet about 2 years ago, and it really hit me. And the tweet was a picture of a shopping center, a well-known supermarket chain, with these Ramadan marketing campaigns and Ramadan sales. And it had a caption or a meme, and the meme said, when capitalism is more prepared for Ramadan than you are. And I thought, oh my God, that is so true. You know, there's hadith from the Prophet, peace upon him, about using Shaban and other months to prepare for Ramadan. And yet, these big corporate companies are so much more prepared than we are. So what does that tell us about us? And Ramadan is a month about spirituality and devotion to Allah, and it's now become more about buying power and what we spend. And unfortunately, corporates have taken control from us and are easily able to influence us into making Ramadan a commercial exercise. And it's important that we reclaim that. You know, it shouldn't be about buying, buying, buying. So I suppose my take-home message to you all, from my aspect, is simplicity, modesty, and humility is the take-home message. It holds the key to many of our environmental issues we're facing today. It also holds many of the climate change issues we're facing. And we will one day stand in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be answerable for the beautiful resources that the earth provides us and the blessings that we all plundered. So we need to really reflect on what our role is. So Jazakallah khair for listening to me. I hope I've done it justice and given you some insight into what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or how he would have spent his Ramadan. Okay, I will now move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is someone who I've got to know well, and someone who whose work, whose campaigning, who I really admire. Alessandra Palange of XR Muslims. She's going to talk about Green Ramadan at home and how you can bring about change. Alessandra is also known by Safia, by her family and friends, and she's a mother of 4 beautiful children. She's a PhD student researching Islamic online education and activism. She's also a member of Extinction Rebellion's National Citizen Assembly Working Group and the XR faith communities. And she has been concerned about environmental issues since a young age, but her passion for living a life in harmony with nature has been rekindled in recent years through her interest in natural crafts. Safia, I now hand over to you.
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to say I had slides that I had prepared, and I cannot share them with you, but I have a link, so I cannot share links either here, but perhaps we can find a way to do that later. Yes, I mean, let me just open them actually, because I was meant to have them in front of me. Yes, so I just wanted to start by saying I usually don't talk about issues of, let's say, individual lifestyle choices around sustainability. And I think that goes back many years. You mentioned that my interest in sustainability started, and environmentalism started very young. I remember in the 90s with a clipboard going around trying to get signatures to save the pandas. And I look back and I think, wow. And then I remember the realization of the severity of the environmental problems that we're facing today came around 2000, when my dad has started a project. He's a professor at university. He started a project on trying to teach people how to reduce the environmental impact. And I'll just stop for a moment and think, it was 2000. Yeah, so it's been 20 years and things have gone worse and then worse. So one reason why I don't talk about sustainability on the individual level is because I've seen that the change does not really happen at that level, though it's a big part of the cultural shift that we need to achieve. But nevertheless, I'm really happy to be here. Honored. Thank you so much to the Bahu Trust for inviting me, and Kamran. So I've just thought, I was thinking of pieces of advice, tips that I could give to fellow Muslims at the beginning of this month. And the first thing that I could think about, based purely on personal experience, is to understand that if you really want to be environmentally friendly, if you want to kind of live a sustainable lifestyle, you're very limited by the choices that you can take, because society is not designed to be sustainable. So when you think about it, think it's a journey, it's a gradual journey that you take steps every day, and it can have ups and downs, because sometimes, for me at least, and I know for many people within, you know, like the community, it can be quite overwhelming. So take gradual steps. And in my slides, I had a quote, an hadith that said, "Take up good deeds only as much as you're able, for the best deeds are those done regularly, even if they're few." So think of Ramadan as an opportunity to establish some new habits that are very good, and then just in order to continue with the idea that you can continue afterwards. My second piece of advice would be, think of this as a journey of discovering and learning. We don't have the solutions. We have to create solutions together. So ideas that I can think of as, you know, repeating what Kamran said, sometimes try to use your time productively. And some things that you can do is commit yourself to watching documentaries rather than watching maybe some things that would be considered more trivial during the year. You can commit to something a little bit more, and it doesn't have to be boring stuff. There is so much out there. There are so many things. I watched a documentary on the BBC about making planes sustainable if you're into travel and planes. So there are so many things that you can find. You can think of activities to do with children. I had here an example of what my children have liked to do once with me, which is the carbon footprint calculator of the WWF. It's something that you can look at and see all the different areas of your life where you can make maybe small changes to reduce your carbon footprint. You can join also networks. On Facebook is full. I had an example here of a journey to zero waste in the UK, and these are massive groups. They have 70,000, 100,000 people. You get a lot of support and a lot of ideas and tips and things that you can do. And yeah, that's about it for I mean, it's just, you know, you can pick up a book and you can watch documentaries, anything for learning about these. We are all learning these kind of things. Even scientists, academics at university, we're learning how to transition to a sustainable society. So you're definitely not alone. My third advice, which Kamran said already, is about diet. In the past, I was reading an article some time ago, and I was shocked to find out that in the past 20 years, portion sizes have doubled or even tripled. I have to check this, but, you know, definitely doubled. So they are selling us bigger portions and we are eating bigger portions. This is a social issue. It's not just us being very greedy. And so one of the biggest things we can do is reduce our portion sizes, which, as Kamran explained very well, it's a prophetic tradition. So we have all the solutions in our own being, in our own traditions already, which always never ceases me to amaze me. And also meats. I had a graph here that showed you the beef consumption, how much carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions it produces. So just reducing beef consumption can make such a big difference. So increasing vegetables, fresh vegetables, often non-cooked vegetables. I have a raw diet, and just increasing of a little bit the meat consumption can make a massive difference. And think about the life and the diet that the Prophet ﷺ would have had at the time. Would have been much simpler. There's a reason why our tradition, you know, we have a tradition around killing animals, the sacrality of it. And there's a reason why it used to be such a big feast, a celebration to sacrifice animals, because it wasn't an everyday thing like we're used now. This is a post-industrial modern way of life. It's definitely not something traditional. And my fourth piece of advice would be just commit to buying less. This is usually the time of the year where I'm preparing the Eid party for my family. We're, alhamdulillah, we're a big family, loads of children, and thinking of just changing the ways you buy and just committing. You need to ask a few questions, like loads of questions before you buy. You know, do I really need it? Can I borrow it? Can I swap it with someone? Can I get it from a second hand? There are so many apps and charity, and even the charity shops that sell things that are brand new, because we have a surplus of things in society that we can just use rather than buy something new. Can we make something? Let's revive crafts. We used to do loads of things with our hands only 50, 60, 70 years ago, and now everything we just buy and replace all the time. And only as a last resort, think of buying something new. The fifth advice, which is really connected to the previous one, is try to reduce your waste. Again, society and just any kind of design college, any place that you can think of, where I could, even the way we build our homes, but any kind of design process does not embed sustainability in the actual process of designing and making things. So what we have got used to is buying something and then throwing it away. And we have loads of things that have a limited lifespan. So while businesses and designers need to get used to the idea of designing something that can be fixed, repaired, composted, rebuilt, taking the bits apart and then rebuilding it, we're not at that stage yet. So when we make shopping choices, we need to think, how long am I going to use it for? And can it be fixed? And again, do I really need it? So there are, and like, for example, Kamran used the example of the miswak. In some of these Facebook groups that I belong to, with 100,000 people, when they think, well, how can I replace the plastic toothbrush? And I just never, I'm so amazed that people talk about miswak, the Prophet solution. And you've got so many people just talking, non-Muslims talking about this, which is in itself probably a form of dawah, indirect dawah, that just comes naturally. And just get rid of single-use plastics, all of these kind of choices, this kind of production and consumption and waste cycle didn't exist, again, 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's something that, when the Quran talks about extravagance and waste and avoiding that, we live in the age of extravagance and waste. So being mindful of that and just really taking Ramadan as a way to reflect about these things, about the small things that we do every day. We are bombarded with deals, cheap deals, buy this latest thing. Let's just maybe stop and think more about our choices. And my sixth piece of advice was about energy consumption. Switch off appliances and just go outside, recite, meditate, read a book. Just generally taking that as an act of worship itself, Bismillah, we switch off and just go outside and listen to the beautiful natural entertainment that is outside with the birds singing. And then again with water, and wudu is something I remember seeing a long time ago, a video of an old man giving wudu with a bucket and saying that that's the prophetic way of doing that. And I was just amazed. I was, we are so used to going to the masjid and finding these big taps and water flowing, and yet it stops, but then you have to start again. So you end up consuming so much water, and we can just use a bucket. And the funny thing with that, when I learned to do wudu many years ago, more than a decade ago, it was so difficult for me. So I used to think and really ponder on what I was doing. Now it's become such a mechanical thing that thinking of saving water and having a different, and it kind of connects me to Allah, connects me, because I'm just being more mindful, and that's just in itself is such a good thing. So think about anything to do with water and how I can save it or recycle it. For example, if you're blessed enough to have a garden, that is just a great thing. And again, these are all small things that you can establish now in Ramadan for the future. And the next Ramadan, inshallah, you can build it up again. And I just wanted to conclude, and I know I mentioned it a couple of times, that I wanted to show you a slide of Climate Assembly UK, which is taking place right now in the UK. And it is a citizen assembly that's tackling the question of how we get to zero carbon emissions by 2050, which is the government target. And here, Professor Rebecca Willis, who is leading this assembly, she was showing this kind of triangle, and it had the government here, us as individuals here, and then businesses here. And as I showed with examples on how we actually consume and produce things, we have to work all together. It needs to be a concerted effort, economic, cultural, and social effort to make those changes. So my last piece of advice would be try to think at the government level, both central and local, your council, what I can do later when things start to reopen again. Do we want to go back to normal? What was normal good in the first place? And kind of take that example. And I had another slide which is just far too difficult to explain without you seeing it, but it just literally shows that there are different levels of government intervention. And here the example gave, I think it was healthy eating. Yeah, I think it was healthy eating. And it showed that, there may be the government doing nothing or informing people. So just running information campaigns, for example, or changing some options, or again, intervening with more coercion, let's say. So just giving incentives, disincentives, eliminating choice all at once. So we really need to go up the ladder. This is called the ladder of intervention, of government intervention. We need to go up that ladder to make sure that things change. And we have a part to play with in that as individuals. And just Kamran, if you allow me, I just want to say thank you again. This is the end of my presentation. I just want to say we have some webinars coming on. You can, if you're interested, Kamran can maybe share later with you via an email. We have some Ramadan talks taking place from Tuesday. And I'm also very happy, I will be putting the slides on the websites, on our website, and I'm very happy for you to share them, to use them, to change them. And if you want to give talks in your community, use this information, add more information, and take it and share it with others. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Safia. That was really helpful. I will email everybody with our presentations and any notes you want me to send. And I think all the details you asked about your webinars will be on your slides. Please everyone, please do submit your questions, and we will ask them afterwards. And there were some key talking points that Safia mentioned. I mean, she mentioned wudu, which I think sometimes we use so much water in doing wudu, we're actually wasting wudu. And I had, you mentioned bucket, and I have this lovely little vessel, and this is a replica of the vessel that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used for his wudu. Just one of these every time he did wudu. So it's called a mud, M-U-D-D. And when he did his ghusl, his bath, he used 4 of these. So you can see our Prophet ﷺ was very key. And I'll be honest, I learned this when I went to Africa, when I went to rural Tanzania. And we're used to doing wudu using so much water. And when I went to this mosque, they were using a tiny cup, probably even smaller than this. And I wasn't aware how to do wudu, and he taught me. And then I was still able to complete all my fard and sunnah, most of it. In fact, I would direct you to YouTube. Just write, YouTube. Just put doing wudu saving water, and you'll find some really good techniques of how to do it. So thank you, Safia, for that. I'm sorry, I just want to. You mentioned about campaigning for change, and that's so important because. For 2 reasons. Number one, we know as a masjid at Sultan Bahu, at the Bahu Trust in Birmingham, we have tried to do plastic-free iftars. We've been doing it for 3-4 years. And it's impossible to buy things without plastic. So we can try to push it as much, but the people are not going to change unless it comes from the very top, that either local council or government make policy changes in stopping people from providing these. So some things are difficult, and again, it's from within the Sunnah to call for change. There's a hadith where the Prophet says that if you see an injustice, change it with your hands. If you can't change it with your hands, then you speak up about it, and if you can't speak up about it, then you feel it in your heart. But that's the least of your faith, and that's in Sahih Muslim. So, we're seeing huge environmental justice here. So thank you. Okay, moving on to our next speaker. He's someone who, he's going to hate me because he hates people reading his bio or praising him, but he's on mute, so I can say whatever I like about him at the moment. He's one of my teachers, and he's a mentor, and he's somebody who I turn to quite often. His name is Hafiz, Dr. Ather Hussain Azhari. He's an Imam, writer, and researcher. Unfortunately, he's a Leicester fan, but there's nothing I can do about that. That's his challenge and his test in life. He's graduated from the Azhar University. I can read out a lengthy bio about him, but it's on the website. But one thing that I really value about Hafiz Ather is that he talks very much about contemporary issues that are facing us. And especially for youngsters, he's very good at making the deen and old classical teachings, traditional teachings, easy for them. I'm very much inspired on his talks on mental health, on materialism, on fake news, on environmentalism. And recently I was invited by Hafiz Ather to deliver one of his talks that he normally delivers on environmentalism. So, I mean, that was, I felt uncomfortable, but he as the main lead sat in front of the class and was taking notes. And that was a huge example to everybody else that doesn't matter how much you've studied, you're never clever enough to not continue learning more. So I'd like to invite Hafiz Ather to talk about Ramadan and isolation and mental health, and what does the teachings from the Quran and Sunnah, how does it bring the best out of us? So Hafiz, over to you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa al-aqibatu lil muttaqin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursalin, amma ba'd. Faqad qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'anil Majid wal Furqanil Hamid. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. صدق الله العظيم. Respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Esteemed members of the panel, Jazakallah for allowing a platform to talk about this issue. My sincerest thanks to Sultan Bahu Trust in general and to my wonderful colleague. It's wonderful to do your ziyarah again, Kamran, Shezad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you both physical and spiritual health. I've only got maybe 10 minutes, and certainly like yourselves, I do want to hear from the remaining members of our panel. I am sure that there will be some questions. To the best of our ability, we will try to answer them. So I will get straight into it. My particular topic this afternoon is Ramadan, isolation, and mental health. Basically, if we were to summarize it in a nutshell, everyone, including myself, we're very, very anxious going into this Ramadan. It will be a Ramadan like no other. A Ramadan in isolation, distance from extended family, cut off from the most beloved of places, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like yourselves, it hurts. Like for the last 4 or 5 weeks that we have been felt a spiritual void on Fridays, a sense of emptiness that we're not allowed to go to the house of Allah, that the doors of our mosque or family shut. And this is just for the day of Friday. A lot of people are very, very worried about what will happen in the month of Ramadan, a month where we associate ourselves with the house of Allah, where we are there 24/7. However, what I want to do, and this is my only purpose really, is that yes, we are anxious. We are somewhat scared and worried about what will happen this Ramadan. But I want to remind people that there are so many positives to be derived. Follow the sunnah of Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, who always found good in the most difficult of situations. All I want to do is to mention 2 simple points. Number 1, that Ramadan in isolation this year, in lockdown, is not as strange as one thinks. The whole concept of isolation and the whole concept of Ramadan, in my opinion, they are very closely linked together. Kamran Shezad has already brought up some pearls of wisdom to remind us about that. The second point, and I will have to spend less time on this, is that mental health, by nature, it was a topic area which was very, very serious in our community, indeed throughout the whole world, before the appearance of COVID-19. Now, many observers feel that this condition will simply worsen. If, however, Muslims understand and appreciate Islam's take on mental health, then I am sure that this will help them immensely during this testing time, through Ramadan and out of it, during this horrible time of the lockdown and isolation, after it as well. So I will mention a few points about that. But I will start by talking about Ramadan and isolation. These 2 words, if you look at it carefully, they are very, very closely related. They are intertwined, you could say. They go hand in hand. And I'm going to share with you 5 or 6 examples to show the fact that we are doing a Ramadan in isolation this year. It's not as strange as it thinks, and there are so many positives to be derived. They will complement one another. The first thing, number 1, Ramadan by nature is a lesson in resistance and self-control. I mean, let's face it, during Ramadan, you know, there's still food in your fridge. You can still, you know, make your way there. It's not locked, your fridge. But the trick is that during the daylight hours in the month of Ramadan, there's almost a spiritual barrier now between yourself and the fridge, where you stop yourself from actually opening the door. And that is the exact definition of what taqwa is. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the whole purpose of fasting really is to create a sense of taqwa. That's all taqwa really is. It's an invisible barrier that stops you from doing things which are haram. And that test is multiplied in the month of Ramadan with the most basic of your needs, which is food and water. So one of the most basic lessons of Ramadan is resistance and self-control. Allahu Akbar. You know, with this isolation right now, our current circumstances, the lockdown, our front doors, just like the fridge door, they're not bolted shut. We can still leave the home. But it's almost as if an invisible barrier exists which stops us from leaving the front door. And whereas with the fridge, it was a spiritual barrier, now with the front door, it's almost a moral and social responsible barrier almost, to the NHS, to key workers, to the vulnerable, to our elders who we daily want to visit during the lockdown. But it's that sense of mahabba which stops us from doing it. So, subhanallah, Ramadan by nature teaches resistance, self-control. Over the last 4 or 5 weeks, have we not already been practicing that? Are we not stopping ourselves and resisting ourselves to go outside and to wander, and so that we can protect people around us? So this is the first point. The second point, what is Ramadan ultimately about? Ramadan in reality is just a means by which we thank Allah once again, we appreciate his wonderful favors. And in many ways, this is the ultimate purpose, the ultimate objective of Ramadan. For 11 months, we eat, we consume, we waste, and we don't really value what is in front of us. So for 1 month out of the 12 months, all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is he takes away the greatest favor and the most important favor, food and water. And the whole purpose behind it, Allah is no killjoy. And Allah doesn't want to put us in trouble. Allah doesn't take any benefit or derive any sense of joy from seeing us in trouble by taking away food and water. All Allah simply wants from us is to say Alhamdulillah. And sometimes he has to take away a favor in order for us to do that. So the point is that the ultimate purpose of Ramadan, and sometimes we need reminding of this, is appreciation and thanks. Our circumstances are simply about these two values as well, appreciation and thanks. That's why we're standing on our streets every Thursday and uploading the NHS. That's why the word hero now has become synonymous with the National Health Service. So this isolation, it's led to appreciating the great favors once again of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We value community spirit once again. So it's almost ironic that the lockdown it's unlocked so many things from our hearts, not least the ability to appreciate, to say thank you, to show a sense of gratitude for the people around us once again. The third point, I will only spend a few moments on this, is Ramadan by nature is also synonymous with i'tikaf, a prized sunnah of our Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. And as it is his sunnah, this is something that Muslims are requested to do during the month, the sunnah mu'akkada kifaya. Subhanallah, are we not already in a form of i'tikaf already, and will this not continue during this month, albeit for a different reason? We are staying at home again. We can still perform the i'tikaf by dedicating ourselves to one particular space in the house, where for the brothers, for the sisters as well. So i'tikaf goes hand in hand with the month of Ramadan. Our i'tikaf is happening right now. We are secluding ourselves away from the dunya. We are isolating ourselves away from the material. This will continue. Purification, the penultimate thing I want to share with you, is that for 11 months, we pick up illnesses and we pick up rust which affects our heart. And we basically impure ourselves. And the whole purpose of the month of Ramadan is to purify our thoughts, once again, our hearts and our limbs. And we call this tazkiyah. Tazkiyah is a spiritual purification. And owing to the isolation we are in right now, owing to the lockdown, purification is happening everywhere. It's certainly happening in the environment. It's only the humans that are in lockdown. Otherwise, it seems that the natural world is enjoying full freedom once again. Air pollution has drastically reduced in all major cities. Skies are clear once again, so we can gaze at the stars in the evening. Animals are roaming freely in an ironic twist. It's almost the zoo has become reversed now. That is, it's the humans which are locked up and the animals are free everywhere. Canals in Venice, in Birmingham, wherever you go, are clean. So the world we damaged and abused for so long is right now in the process of tazkiyah, purification. And the same goes for us humans as well. This isolation has cleaned our hearts. It's cleaned our hearts from all of the prejudice that perhaps we had picked up prior to this, based on gender, race, religion, and ethnicity. And if I was to summarize it, I think what this process has done, and inshallah it will continue in the month of Ramadan, it's just discovered the human once again in humanity. And then the final point about isolation and Ramadan is, we know very well how Ramadan is the perfect antidote to greed. that the whole purpose of Ramadan is to once again focus on need rather than greed. And subhanAllah, isn't this isolation, has it not changed our spending habits, perhaps forever? Is it not now fruitful rather than wasteful? You know, for so long, we have been obsessed with our outer appearance. In this lockdown, in this isolation, we cannot visit the beauty parlor. We're not going to the barbers. We're not going to the high street fashion stores. And what this has done, and inshallah it will continue, is turned our attention to the inner beauty, to our kindness, to our selflessness, to our humanity. So we are beautifully purifying our hearts and gearing our efforts towards the inner once again, not the outer. Consumerism is dead, at least for now. And in its place, spiritualism, subhanAllah, has appeared. So these points, all I have done is taken a very, very sensitive, difficult, anxious time. And I have tried to show that positives can be derived from this difficult time. And that is basically, we're taking the lockdown, we're taking the isolation, we're taking the social distancing. And it is a difficult time, but we are showing that good can come out of it. How it really is down to us now, what we are required to do is to show how we can deal with it, how we can perceive it. It's all about our approach to it, our perspective. And that, and I will conclude with this, is exactly what Islam's position is on mental health. Sadness, worries, depression, anxieties. All Islam says that these things, they are inevitable in our lives. It is part and parcel of the test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can't ask for an untested life. What we can ask for is a life where we can have the tools, the mechanism by which we can overcome this. And part of that, and the main thing where we really need to adjust in, is our mindset. We can't control what happened in the cabinet meetings. We can't control how many PPE equipment there is in the world. What we can control is, and Kamran mentioned, is how much time we spend on the phone, and how much of that time is that actually constructive time as well. It's about making sure that our mindset remains the positive one. We can control how much time we spend on ourselves and not others. We can, focus more on what we can unlock during this lockdown. And we can focus on what we do have rather than what we don't. So it is a difficult time for those people who, during this pandemic, have lost an individual, a beloved during this period. Our sincerest du'as are with them. Those people who are suffering right now because of the symptoms of it, wallahi lazim, our prayers are with you, that may Allah give you full shifa. For those fortunate people of society, for the Muslims and the non-Muslims outside that bracket, please stay positive. This is the beautiful sunnah of our Messenger, alayhi salatu wassalam. They are tests. They are tribulations that come from our Lord. All they are doing is strengthening us. And if anything, I think we will experience one Ramadan, but in terms of its strength and in terms of what it does to us, inshallah ta'ala, it will feel like 15 Ramadans. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the strength, the physical and spiritual strength to enjoy this Ramadan. Ameen. Wa ma alayna illa al-balagh.
Thank you, Hafsab. There's lots of food for thought there. And it's so true, like our prophets had tests in their life. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his whole life was a struggle. He was the best of creations, yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put struggles his way as a sunnah for us to observe, because at the end of that struggle, there is something so beautiful waiting for us.
Absolutely. I mean, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was asked this question, that Ya Rasulallah, ayyun nasi ashaddu bala'a, that which type of people are tested most by Allah? To which our messenger, peace be upon him, said, Al-Anbiya. Musa spoke directly to Allah, yet he was abused by his people. Ibrahim was the friend of Allah, yet look how much trouble he went through. And no one went through more trouble than Sayyiduna Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. Yet in a beautiful lesson, subhanallah, the companions say that it was that same individual who smiled the most. The companions say, Ma ra'aytu ahadan aksara tabassuman min Rasulillah alayhi salatu wassalam. That they said, we never saw anyone smile more than the Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. So keep the faith in this very, very difficult time.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Hafiz. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, next and final speaker, Sarah Joseph. Sarah is a writer and a broadcaster, internationally recognized public speaker and entrepreneur. Renowned for her independent and innovative thinking, she has addressed audiences the world over. Sarah has spent almost 25 years in various forms of media, and in 2003, she founded emel, a brand which first created the concept and then the detailed progression of Muslim lifestyle. You probably can't see, but the bookshelf behind me, I've got about 30 different editions of the emel magazine. And it used to be one of my favorite magazines. And she's always said that her favorite emel issues include the topics of eco-jihad issues and the issues of environmental stewardship. And Sarah was awarded an OBE in June 2004 in the Queen's Birthday Honours for her services to interfaith dialogue and the promotion of women's rights. And she has been listed as one of the UK's most powerful Muslims in the Muslim Power 100. And I have to say, whilst I was reading the magazines, and also Sarah does Reflective Thoughts, and I think Pause for Thought on BBC Radio. And she's always been on my mind, as in, oh, I wish I knew Sarah. I wish I could just pick her up and ask her opinion on something. And Allah Ta'ala answered my dua, I think in February, where I met her for the first time. And since then, I've got to know her better and somebody who I can turn to when I need some advice. So Sarah, over to you now to give your reflections about Ramadan, COVID-19, what post-COVID looks like, what it means in terms of the environment. Do we rush back to business as usual? And for you to just give us some food for our minds.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to God, the Lord and sustainer of all the worlds. And I greet you with a greeting of peace and mercy from your Lord. Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, many thanks to you, Kamran, for organizing this webinar for Earth Day. Happy Earth Day 2020, everyone. You know, mashallah, Kamran put this all together so swiftly and with such focus, mashallah, mashallah. So may Allah bless you and reward you for bringing us together. And I've used Zoom in the past for meetings, and now we're using it for family get-togethers with our mum on a Sunday morning. But it's wonderful to be able to bring so many people together today to discuss Ramadan, to reflect on the environment, and of course to ponder the implications of COVID-19. And before I begin, I just want to express some deep and profound concerns for everyone, because my topic today will look at possible lessons that we can learn from COVID-19, but I'm doing this in the full knowledge that actually the world is still in the process of deep trauma and suffering, actually. And so I think we probably all know of at least one person who's passed on from COVID-19. My timeline is literally full of lost relatives, of mothers, of fathers, of aunts, of uncles, of grandparents, of sisters, brothers, children, old and young, who are being lost to this virus that we have no control over and no vaccine for. And there is anxiety. Families are unable to be with their loved ones during their last moments on earth. Funerals are being mourned without mourners. And at the same time, people are struggling financially. Incomes are being slashed, jobs are being lost, people are struggling with food security, food. There are families in this country, in the UK, the 5th richest country in the world, that genuinely do not know where their next meal is coming from. And there'll be deep scars left on families and on communities. And I really feel that it's important, and I just want to acknowledge all of that up front before I begin to look at anything else. And I just want to keep that in perspective. So whilst I thought for a short while that I'd begin this talk of showing images of the decreasing nitrogen oxide levels over China and Italy of the Himalayas being seen from India for the first time in 30 years, of the waterways of Venice being clean, of wildlife sauntering into cities, I paused, because yes, all of these things are happening, and considering air pollution kills 3 million people every year, the decrease in air pollution is very, very welcome. But the issues are fundamentally more complex, because decrease in economic activity that is leading to the decrease in air pollution also means that jobs are being lost and people will go hungry. And the people whose low wages meant they were not able to save for a rainy day are now literally in peril, not just from the virus itself, but from the economic fallout that the necessary lockdown is wreaking on global economies. Because at this moment, the world is set up. The crazy rat race, fueled by the creed of economic growth, means that the current crisis will hit the poor and the weak the hardest. So for me, I think that there can be no exaltation that nature has spoken, whilst we reflect on the image and the reality that people are suffering. We deserve more than that. There really are hard questions to ask and, quite frankly, assumptions to be challenged. And I believe truly that COVID-19 doesn't just expose issues pertaining to the environment, it is exposing fundamental inequalities which Muslim nations have fully bought into and fueled, literally fueled with oil for decades. And indeed, I think it's really important to acknowledge early on that Muslims are also part of the global problem. And I personally dislike these kind of glib responses and cliches that Islam has all of the answers. If it does, Muslim nations have fundamentally failed to interpret Islam in any relevant way for the 21st century that provides global social justice. Islamic finance, as an example, which was a real opportunity for change, turned out to be marketing over substance. We changed the names of things without fundamentally changing anything. Oil, which we've seen the price tank, it's literally worth, it's too expensive to store. That's how little the value of it is. But it's a capital asset for numerous Muslim countries, and it's been squandered for decades. And no thought was given to renewable energy, even when all evidence pointed to the destruction wrought by burning fossil fuels. But we have the chance now, perhaps a once in a century chance, to redesign our future. And so, as we head towards Ramadan in lockdown, in the midst of a pandemic, what are the questions we should be asking? What lessons can we possibly learn? For me, whilst I fast simply and completely because it is a command from the merciful that I fast, I do see that one of the chief lessons of Ramadan should always be about social justice. The month, in my mind, is a resistance to consumerism and reminds us of the needs of the poor. The hunger and that thirst which Ramadan creates should provide a heightened sense of awareness, and thus an ideal time to contemplate those who cannot end their hunger with a table spread of tasty food or quench their thirst with a fresh water from a tap. But quite frankly, all too often Ramadan becomes a routine, and often, ironically, it becomes a time fueled by food and busyness. Often it's the opposite of a reflective moment. And we complete Ramadan year on year on year. But do things change for ourselves, for the world's poorest? Does hunger and thirst make us uncomfortable at the injustice that's going on in the world? Does it rankle in our hearts? And if it does it go beyond that? Or are we simply playing lip service without causing any fundamental change? So in the same way, COVID-19 provides us with a heightened experience, a chance to work out what's important to us and what isn't. But what will we come out of COVID-19 with? The crisis will pass because everything passes. But what will be changed? Will lockdown have taught us anything? Will the world be altered? We have the chance, really, a great opportunity to rethink everything. And will we take it? In a YouGov poll, which was just last week, only 9% of respondents said they wanted things to go back to normal after COVID-19, after the lockdown ends. The vast majority of people polled saw some positive changes despite the difficulties. Participants described how they valued food and other essentials more. Others noted cleaner air and increased wildlife. Many said they'd noticed that bird song we were speaking of. People spoke of a feeling of a stronger sense of community and welcome time spent catching up with friends and family, even if it meant it was happening online. At the same time, people described how they were spending less money. So who knows how many of these changes will be sustained? But the poll shows that there is, at the bare minimum, a desire for things to change, that there are lessons to be learned from the crisis, and people are being given an opportunity to see the world differently. And the vast majority don't want things to simply slip back into how they used to be. People are reimagining a better future, and potentially one where the health and well-being of humans is inseparably linked to the health and well-being of the planet. And people are seeing that environmental, social, political, and economic change are actually possible. We're realizing that we can live without, and we're realizing what we can't live without. The essentials of life have been laid bare. We're experiencing Maslow's pyramid of needs in real time. And whilst getting back to work is, of course, important to so many of us, fueling the great rat race doesn't seem to be on anyone's lists of priorities. And since the 20th century, growth of our GDP has become the marker of a nation's success. If we take GDP as a marker, then we are in real trouble. Our planet is in dire straits. You can't have limitless growth on a limited planet. It's impossible. Environmentalists have really been focusing on the growth problem, with global consumption growing at an unsustainable 3% prior to COVID-19. Environmentalists are saying that consumption is the root of the problem for the planet. And the Quran speaks very clearly about excess, but waste not by excess, for God loves not the wasteful. But UK GDP looks set to radically contract in the wake of COVID-19. Now, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the UK's Treasury's official forecaster, has warned that UK GDP could contract by 35% in the coming months due to coronavirus. And this would be the largest quarterly decline in economic activity in 100 years, maybe ever, in fact. But even before COVID-19, people were questioning this obsession with growth. Last year, the New Zealand government of Jacinda Ardern ditched GDP as its main measure of economic success, instead choosing to focus on maximising the well-being of its population. Fundamentally, GDP is not some sacred measure given to us by revelation. It's a marker which economists came up with, and like many other such markers, we owe them no allegiance. Even money. What exactly is money? It's not real in the same way that my hand is real or a loaf of bread is real. The stock market goes up and down, but is there something really tangible in that? Or are we dealing ultimately with the confidence of stockbrokers that give the numbers of the Dow Jones or the FTSE any meaning? Our economy and our governments should exist to be of service to us, its citizens. And if they fail in that, then it's the obligation of us citizens to call them to account, to ask why, what's going on. And sometimes we're too busy living life, of keeping the normal everyday ticking over. There's no time to ask the big questions. When you're so exhausted from a 1-hour commute to work, an 8-hour working day and a 1-hour commute home, what time is there to rethink the whole machine? And so COVID-19 is allowing many of us time to question the day-to-day norms we have grown accustomed to living. It's allowing for cleaner air and more birdsong. It's also allowing us to ask questions about what's important. And if we decide that happiness doesn't lie in the acquisition of things, maybe we will find space for what makes us feel genuinely fulfilled. As we spend less, maybe we can work less. It's hard. The Quran reminds, rivalry for worldly gain will distract you until you go down to your graves. But that passage continues. You should be questioned about your joys and your comforts. I think it's an important time to recognize, it's sort of an interesting parallel with Ramadan, actually, what we're going through. Ramadan asks us to turn Maslow's pyramid of needs on its head, where the fundamental sort of physical needs of food and water, etc., are at the bottom, the foundations, we need them, but the higher order spiritual, the self-reflection and self-actualization, which are at the top of the pyramid. Now, Ramadan sort of skews that and says, no, we're not going to focus on the food and the water, we're going to focus on the spiritual and self-actualization. And potentially our experience of COVID-19 may do the same, and it may give us some answers to the even bigger crisis of climate change. And I say bigger crisis because climate change will probably make COVID-19 look like a walk in the park ultimately. And I cannot and I will not say COVID-19 is a blessing, not even a blessing in disguise. It has caused too much pain and too much suffering already, let alone what is to come. And I truly believe there is more to come. But I pray we can acknowledge and value the positive responses, the seeing the selfless workers, the NHS and so many others. A reassessment of who are essential workers, and a clue here, it's not the hedge fund managers. Looking at the volunteers and literally the hundreds of thousands and millions of people who volunteered, the sense of community, the humane actions, the random acts of kindness, as well, of course, as the decrease in pollution and the focus on the environment. At the same time, we must continue to probe, to ask precisely what is happening to the sweatshop workers currently earning pennies per mask as they work in crowded conditions. They're making protective equipment during a pandemic. Can we not value them? To ask precisely about the essential workers earning minimum wage on 0-hour contracts, often for corporations who pay no tax into the system. We have to keep probing. We have to keep asking some very big questions. And thankfully, there are some positive global responses. Denmark is refusing to bail out companies that don't pay tax in Denmark. And this is a huge decision because it's asking fundamental questions about taxation and the giant corporations. Amsterdam is to embrace the donut model to mend its post-coronavirus economy. Donut economics is a model which seeks to fulfill the needs of people without exceeding the ecological capacity of the earth. Nature is bountiful, but it's not infinite. And I do really highly recommend looking up donut economics. It was created by Oxford professor Kay Rayworth. There's a lot on her website as well as on YouTube. And I think it's really important to note here that the kind of economic models that we have of growth, of GDP growth, that, as I've said before, they're not sacred. We don't have to follow them. New models can be created, things which are more relevant for the 21st century and our global world. So the answers to humanity's problems may come from unexpected places, and I believe truly we must be open to them. I pray that COVID-19 allows for a deep and profound reflection where great minds from all faiths and none can come together with the common purpose of healing our world. We've seen cleaner air, and that is an absolute bounty. We have seen governments find money when before there was none. We were in this sort of sacred altar of austerity where there was no money, and suddenly we have seen intervention and governments prepared to intervene across the world. All sorts of different governments, all sorts of different political persuasions intervening because they have had to. We have seen the homeless housed. We have learned we can self-organize in communities. We have learned that change is possible if there is the will to make it happen. We have seen that our economic models are not sacred and that they can be changed overnight, in fact. Now, none of this can be forgotten. Ramadan comes around once a year. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of renewal, which, inshallah, God willing, will recharge us for the next 11 months. Now, COVID-19 is a level of global crisis that comes around in a generation or more, in a century. And may it provide us with the impetus for genuine, sustainable change that will help us value human life, help us value the planet, and allow us humans to see how dependent we are on nature. The planet can live without us, but we cannot live without the planet. Happy Earth Day 2020, everyone, and a very happy Ramadan. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. I'm not quite sure how to sum that up. There's so much to consider and think, and how, again, I think that was kind of adding on to what Safia Alessandra was saying earlier about the need to push for change and change the system, because it can't be business as usual after this. Okay, bearing in mind we've got 15 minutes left, I'm going to go through some of the question and answers. Just a quick shameless plug for all our attendees who are listening. Please do, if you're on Twitter, please just share your comments on our by using our Twitter handle @Bahu Trust UK. Please do that. Okay. Please, panelists, can I ask everyone, because we've got a few questions to get through, keep your answers short and succinct. And first question is, I suppose, for Hafiz, Ather, and even Alessandra, is we were speaking earlier about animal sacrifice for Eid, and it's increased in recent time. Now, can someone please shed a bit of light on the true Islamic practice of animal sacrifice? So Hafiz, Ather, I'll actually ask you to answer that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm going to be very quick. I'll just mention 3 or 4 points. Number 1, Islam is very specific when it comes to which type of animal is going to be sacrificed. It's a sheep, it's a camel, it's a cow, and it's a goat. All of them have to be fit and healthy. All of them have a minimum age. None of them can have any type of physical defects. You will notice that none of those animals are in any way in danger of extinction. In New Zealand, there were 4.6 million people. In the same country, there were 30 million sheep. There were 3 times as many sheep in Wales than there are people. So none of these animals are going to go into extinction. Islam does not allow hunting for entertainment purposes. We have seen Cecil the lion, poachers, and what kind of destruction they cause. Islam has nothing to do with that. Number 2, the Prophet ﷺ told us that when we do perform the sacrifice, it has to be done as humanely as possible. Sayyiduna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was rahmatan lil alamin. So his mercy extended to animals as well. So when people in his time were abusing animals in any way, he ensured that they knew and understood the Islamic perspective, which is to look after animals, to respect them as well. Number 3, our Prophet, peace be upon him, was very specific when it came to how to slaughter the animal in question. He was insistent that the knife has to be as sharp as possible. He insisted that no other animals are there when the actual sacrifice takes place. Our messenger said there should be ihsan, goodness in everything, and that includes the treatment of animals. Number 4, the final point is that Muslims are encouraged to be green even in this sacrifice. They must ensure all parts of the animal are used. Basically, he was asking us to be sustainable and asking us to be green. The skin must be used. The bones can be used. The unused meat should be left for other animals to consume. And you will see that you know better, Kamran, that in the developed countries, in Tanzania, in Africa, that on the sacrifice of Eid al-Adha, how this opens up to many other traders and many other economies, the tanners, the meat market, and so forth. It's a sustainable system. It's not abusive in any way.
Safi, do you want to add to that, or?
Yes, I mean, just in regards to increase, my observation was not about the increase of sacrificing, it's just about, the point was about reflecting on our consumption and how we produce meat right now, and this kind of the sheer scale by which we consume meat now compared to, just a reflection on how, looking back at history. I'm not saying that we should go back, because things have improved in terms of our welfare, and so I'm not someone that says let's go back, but just to reflect on how the farming industry operates and how much we're consuming, and compare to the past and see where we can make changes, especially because the farming industry is so polluting generally. It produces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, next question, I suppose, is for you, Sarah. How is the fight against destruction of the environment linked to other struggles, such as those against Islamophobia or mistreatment of women, for instance?
I think it's really important that we don't separate out climate justice from other forms of justice. And ultimately, it's really important to recognize that the global south will and does take the brunt of climate change. And these are some of the poorest countries in the world. Even looking at COVID-19 and the economic downturns, there are 10 countries of the world that are potentially looking at facing famine. We're not just sort of supermarket shelves running out of toilet paper, but actual famine. And we have to ask, because the world is so interlinked. And I think that's why it's really, really important to be asking the big system questions about how we judge our economics. And we are so dependent upon one another, and how, you know, my purchase of things affects the whole supply chain. But at the same time, what's government intervention and government looking at in about bringing justice, which is why I do recommend the donut economics model, which is it's looking at the tensions between what humans need and what the earth can provide, and how the interlinks, and making sure that we are looking at global systems and how they're connected to each other, because supply chains matter, global supply chains matter. And so we can't look at just one form of injustice. And that's why I believe when Allah says in the Quran, you know, be just, because justice is the closest thing to God consciousness. And that's why justice and looking at equity and justice within the world is so important, whether that is gender justice or climate justice or economic justice. They're inseparable from one another. And we have to do that, because that is the ultimate form of taqwa.
Okay, I suppose then the next question is for you again, Sarah. It's around the same point about economics. So that the questioner, sorry, it's gone. Yeah, I'm an environmental economist and looking at alternative indicators of GDP. Do you have any recommendations for what determinants we can look at to measure progress?
I think what's really important is just the first step in saying, look, we need to start creating new models. They might not actually exist right now. And I would recommend a couple of economists, Anne Pettifor, Mariana Mazzucato, and who's from UCL professor, and Kate Rayworth, who I've already mentioned, from Donut Economics. And I recommend them because they're at least starting to do alternative levels of thinking around what our economy looks like. And I'm really cautious about saying things like green growth. Growth is the problem. We can't keep expanding. We're not our planet isn't an expanding universe in which we can just pump up with air and it will keep growing in limitless supply. It is bountiful, but we have to look at distribution models, and we have to look at the fact that Sophia already made the point about stopping about buying new all of the time. We have to reduce, we have to reuse, we have to recycle. This has been a mantra that's been going on for 40 years. But in terms of models, economic models, they're currently being created, and we ourselves have to first of all say that the GDP growth model is broken, and say that and repeat that and keep going with that message, and then saying, well, what other possible models can we look at? And I mentioned within the talk Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and how they're looking at happiness and well-being as models, looking at the actual population. If we've got targets, sometimes within education, for example, we have these targets, but they're not actually producing happy, well-rounded adults at the end of the education system, then we failed. And so if we're just looking at this sort of GDP growth as a model, but the planet's falling to pieces, it's a model that was useful 100 years ago. It's no use now. So rather than sort of suggesting a specific model, I'm sort of suggesting, different economists who are looking at the problem. And I think that it's great that you're working in environmental economics. Kate Rayworth from Oxford is exactly that. She's a bit of a renegade, but she works at on Environmental Change Institute in Oxford. And these are the type of people we've got to be collaborating with and engaging with.
Okay, last question now, which is for Hafiz, Ather and Alessandra. But I'm going to be cheeky and put this to Hafiz Ather first, because this question would normally go to an environmentalist, but I think it's important that we also hear from people who wouldn't normally be associated with the environmental movement. And the question is, what is the particular contribution that Muslims can bring to the climate movement and broader society to combat climate change? And I'm going to ask you, Hafiz, as an Imam, because you understand our communities, and then I'm going to give the final word to Alessandra on that.
There was a famous speech delivered by Prince Charles about a decade ago in which he said, he was speaking about Islam and the environment, and he basically said that there's two main things that I have discovered, is that number one, when, especially in developing countries, when you tell people to care for the environment and remind them that it's a religious duty, they're more likely to do it. And the second point Prince Charles mentioned is that no religion encourages people to look after the environment better than Islam does. For us, it is a form of worship. That if you harm an animal, you will be responsible and punished for it on the day of judgment. And the other side of that coin now is that if you do anything to increase your understanding of the environment and care for it, you're going to be rewarded for it. It is our messenger, alayhi salatu wassalam, who in practice did all he could for what we now call animal rights, environmental rights, way before the coin was actually termed. It was he himself that you have to be careful and show care and consideration. It was he who said that you should be planting trees, even if it means that the end of time is right upon you. It was he that said that if you are suffering from stress in any form, then go out and mingle with nature. There's a beautiful hadith sharif in which we are told that كان رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام كان يحب أن ينظر إلى الخضراء وإلى الماء الجاري. That our messenger عليه الصلاة والسلام used to love looking at green things. He used to love looking at flowing water. So is this not the greatest, was he not the greatest advocate of green change in this day, for us in this day and age as well? Subhanallah, he was rahmah for everyone.
Alessandra? Anything from you? The question was, what can Muslims bring to the environmental movement?
Well, my answer is really simple. I think just get involved. You know, Sarah mentioned donor economics, and the author has been so involved in the movement in recent months. She's done live streams on Twitter and Facebook, and there are so many people involved, and one of my wishes has been for Muslims to be pioneers and to really get involved in the conversation. There are so many Muslims that are experts in their own fields, and we need to kind of at the grassroots level, in the academia, and pretty much in every area of society, just start a conversation. And the masjids and ask, you know, Muslims are what, I don't know, a percentage must be an average, maybe in the whole of Great Britain, maybe 3%. Just guessing, is a really wild guess, but you know, you imagine Extinction Rebellion said that we need to mobilize 3.5% of the population to achieve change. So that's all of us. So I'm not. It's just a comparison in numbers to see that we're actually important members of the society, and we need to have these conversations everywhere we are. That's the point of why I said I have the presentation, which I didn't show you today, but you can take that, add points that Sarah made, add points that Hafiz Ather said, and it just take it to your workplace, take it to your masjid, take it to your community centers, to your schools, take them everywhere, adapt them, and just continue that conversation everywhere with your councillors, with your mayor, you know, whoever you meet.
Thank you. And it's important to add that faith is a massive motivating factor, and that we need to re-evaluate our faith teachings to align with what Hafiz Ather is saying, because we are motivated by our faith, and that's what we bring. We need to start re-examining how we do things. Okay, I'd like to thank all the panelists for the contribution you've made. I'm really grateful that at short notice you've all agreed, and I've received some wonderful comments which I will email out to everyone on top of the questions, praising the kind of conversations we've had. So thank you. And I will, to all our other attendees, I will email out any notes, any slides, the book recommendation, and anything else. And you can get back to me, you can reply to me if you want anything clarified or you'd like anything else answered. I'd like to finish with a dua or a to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh Allah, you are the creator, the all-powerful, the sustainer of all life. Forgive us for being careless with your earth that you created in perfect measure and balance. Inspire us to love and care for every part of your creation. Allow us to encourage others to care for your creation. Allow us to take seriously the role you have given us to be your steward on earth. Allow us to implement the practices of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by caring for all species, planting trees, valuing each resource, and being grateful for the use of any of your creations for our needs. O Allah, protect the people living with the effects of climate change, of air pollution, of COVID-19, and give them strength, give them patience, and give them strength for those facing rising temperatures, drought, water shortages, unpredictable weather, failed crops, flooding, land loss, and all sorts of other related issues. O Allah, allow us, all people everywhere, to recognize the importance of protecting and maintaining your creation. And Ya Allah, change us and use us in ways that you are pleased for the restoration of your world and the protection of all people. Ameen. Ramadan Mubarak, and may Allah bless you all. Jazakallah khair.